I guess I'll go. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Redistricting Report, the new version of the Redistricting Radar Show. And today we're going to be covering various maps that have been proposed and approved. We're not just covering proposed maps. We're going to be focusing specifically on maps that have been approved and will 100% be in use for the next congressional cycle. But we intend to do this over the next few months as we get map solidified until we can, color in the whole map with all the districts. So this is Redistricting Report, brand new series. It'll always be me as well with Eric, but we're happy to have Armin on for another perspective, and we hope he can join us, my good friend, on future occasions as well. So without further ado, I think our first state is Colorado, and I'll be throwing it to Armin, who is our Colorado expert.
Yeah, so basically the commission had four Democrats, 4 independents, 4 Republicans, and they kind of sat in a Zoom virtual room for quite a few months, and they ironed out a map. And let me pull it up exactly what it is. But if memory serves me correctly, there are 3, pretty likely to safe Republican seats. And there's 4 pretty likely to there it is, 4 pretty likely to safe Democratic seats. And the new seat that it's gaining as a result of the population growth, the 8th, is kind of a toss-uppy seat that, voted for Biden for a bit, but, it's got some very Republican areas in it that could definitely help elect a Republican, with a good candidate and or in a good year. So that's the TLDR there. Incumbent-wise, I don't think too many people are going to be that unhappy with their maps. Lauren Boebert is going to essentially stay in a district that's probably going to reelect her because this new one is a point or 2 redder than the current seat. Now, I do have to mention that a various amount of legal challenges from disgruntled people are making their way through the Supreme Court of Colorado, but we have to see exactly how those are going to play out. I'm no legal expert, but the commission, I think, did a legally defensible job in how they drew their map, and so I'd say 30% chance at best any of those lawsuits succeed in throwing out the map. Because I was watching the hearings yesterday and the day before, and the court was asking, if we do throw out this map, who's going to redraw it? I mean, the commission already would have screwed up, if we actually do that. So are we going to make them do it again? So that's something that's weighing in their minds. So that's Boebert. Ken Buck I think he technically lives in the 8th district because that's where Greeley is now for the Hispanic population. But he can just move. He can just move to the 4th district. He was elected as district attorney in Weld County before, and those voters know him very well, and it's a similar enough seat to what it currently is, and it's safely Republican. Same with Lamborn in the 5th. It loses some of those other Pikes Peak area counties due to the population growth in Colorado Springs, but, even with the Democratic trend in the area, he does outrun the top of the ticket quite a bit, so he should be fine. The 7th is, Ed Perlmutter lives there. He's not going to be in danger because he's a very strong candidate. He's probably just mildly annoyed at having a bunch of new rural counties in his district that he's never represented before.
And I'm sure those counties are annoyed too because they have nothing in common with Jeffco.
I know.
It's absolutely nothing.
It's just a Jefferson County-based seat. It's a bit strange to see it stretch out to take in all these other counties.
And I wrote about this in the summary of the districts. My guess is that they probably drew the Eastern Plains and the Western Slope and Colorado
For the viewers,
Springs.
here is the current map. So this is the current 7th district. Nothing alike, as you can see. It's basically Adams and Jefferson counties, and now.
So my guess is what they did is they probably just drew every district first because of the various parochial interests that are represented. Like the Boulder area, the Western Slope, the Plains, the Springs, Front Range, and at the very end was this rump of counties in the center of the state that no one had any good idea of what to do with. So they were like, screw it, let's just toss it in with Jefferson County, and so you get that district, which everyone I've talked to from Colorado has said, "What the heck is that district?"
Although, is there any of Adams County left in the 7th? I don't think so.
Adams? No. Adams is 4 and 8, and maybe a little bit of 6. Yeah.
Now, I've said this fairly often on Twitter, much to the chagrin of some people, but when you put a bunch of random people in a room who have no experience doing anything and have them draw a map, you're going to get some weird results, and this is one of them. One of the most common things I've read among voters was that they wanted Weld County to be separate from Boulder. This is voters in Weld County and people in Larimer County as well. They wanted, Weld County, Weld and Boulder. They wanted Weld to be with Larimer, which would have resulted in similarly a swing seat, although much more Republican. It would have also royally messed up the rest of the map, which is probably why they didn't go for it. I guarantee you, nobody in Jeffco is like, you know what counties should be in our district? Every single rural county below us that votes for Trump by 15 to 20 points on a consistent basis.
It's more. Canyon City, Fremont County is R plus 40.
Yeah, these aren't going to be happy. They aren't going to be happy at all.
And I mean, just the issues in the district are just so different too. Democrats in Arvada and Lakewood just don't have generally the same focus on a lot of the rural agriculture.
Well, if there's one district that does not change much, it's
the first. Because it's Denver and it's almost perfectly the size of a single district.
Yeah.
And I know that some people on election Twitter were talking about, trying to unpack Denver and carving it up to make a Hispanic opportunity seat. But, you can already do that by redrawing the lines in Adams and at Weld better than how it's done here. Without having to go into Denver at all. And honestly, Aurora exists. Jason Crow doesn't live in Aurora anymore. He lives in Centennial. So if you want, you could go around the DIA and do that.
Speaking of Jason Crow, safer seat, different design now.
Well. Yeah, exactly. I mean, because the Adams area is blue, but it's not like dark blue like Jefferson is now and how Arapahoe is. So, yeah, Crow is not going to lose.
You want to touch on the last seat here?
Oh, the second? Yeah, that's Neguse. He lives in the Boulder area. He's a rising star in the Colorado Democratic Party. And what it seems that the commission did here is they essentially packed every Democratic voter they could find in all of those blue counties into a single seat. What's very interesting is how they did the Eagle County split, which is in the southwestern part of the second. Because Eagle split on the current map between the second and third districts. But they redrew the split so that, one of Lauren Boebert's most high-profile challengers, State Senator Carrie Donovan, her home base is in Vale, which is now about, 10 miles inside the second. And her ranch is, I measured it, about 1,000 feet from the district line. I measured that. I was like, I saw that. I was like, oh boy, Carrie Donovan is not going to be happy about this. So, that kind of is going to take the wind out of the sails of the Carrie Donovan candidacy. And she said as much because she's currently, trying to assess a path forward to see where her candidacy is.
That and the third has been made redder objectively.
Well, the third has been made redder because they took out Routt County and they took out more of Eagle County, and hold on, mouse up a little bit. I think they took out Chaffee and Lake counties as well too, which are both smallish but very Democratic communities. And Chaffee and Lake they put in the seventh. Or Chaffee was previously in 5 and Lake was previously in 3. Those are both in the 7th now. And
although I'm sure you're happy that Los Animas is now in the 3rd.
Well, yeah, so and they've replaced that with a COI's argument for Otero and Las Animas counties, which are heavily Hispanic and arguably make a lot of sense with how they've been drawn. The commission was very adamant that Pueblo, Huerfano, Las Animas, and Otero all go in the same seat. So they did a good job on that front. It's definitely a more Republican-leaning map than Democrats would have liked. But personally, I think all of the choices on this map, except for how they drew the 7th district, all of them are defensible in some way. So
let's go around the horn here and get thoughts on the 8th district in 2022. If it's a good year for the Republicans, how do you think it votes? And Armin, who do you think is going to run on both ends there? Obviously, a new seat created by redistricting, no incumbent.
Right. So this is the kind of area where Weld County saw a small mild shift towards Biden, but it is broadly getting less hostile to Democrats. But the fact is, one, that's not happening fast enough, and two, it's really growing. So Republicans are still netting more votes out of it,
Mhm.
on a cycle by cycle basis. Um, and Weld is a very large county. So you have that. You have a sizable Republican base to work with here. Um, and the second thing is that the Democratic base in the state, in the district, relies on a lot of Latinos. And as we've seen time and time again, Democrats, have been struggling as of late with, trying to figure out how to appeal to Latinos in the state. Now, of course, on the candidate side, the Democrats have a very, very, very strong bench. Yadira Carveo is the nominee, or I guess currently the favored nominee of the Democratic Party. She's a state representative from Thornton, heavily Latino area. She's very well liked by people in the party. Um, on the Republican side, there's a number of folks who could run. Most formidable would probably be State Senator Kevin Priola. He's from the Adams County area, and he represents a Biden +9 district or so as a Republican. He's got a great wealth of experience winning over blue voters in the southern end of the district. So, I think if it was Caraveo versus Priola, that would be a $1 million house race right there, particularly
And
because
what
a
if he
lot of
loses the primary to Steve Reams?
I'm going to touch on that later. The thing about Colorado and the blue shift that's going on there is that in a lot of these areas, the Democratic bench uh, is not as strong as it should be, just by going off of the Biden partisan number. And so the anti-Trump, and so a lot of the blue shift you can say is kind of ahead of where things are at the current moment. So the Republicans definitely still have some strength in the area. Um, Now, you mentioned this. There are definitely tons of candidates less moderate than Priola on the Republican side, notably in the mold of Weld County Sheriff Steve Reeves, who is known for cavorting around with right-wing militias and those types of folks. Now, he would probably. It's a trade-off. So I think he would do better in Weld County and proportionately worse in Adams County. Um, Now, of course, how he actually does depends on how bad of a year 2022 is for Democrats. I think overall the 8th district starts out as leans Democrat as a rating. Like, I'd give a very slight edge to Democrats, but if things are going south and the Republicans are north of 230 seats, this is definitely the kind of thing they're going to pick up in the 8th. So that's
And
just where I'm coming from.
who are some Democratic candidates that would be less than desirable in terms
Um,
of ability?
so from what I've heard, there's Caraveo's the favored one right now. There's a guy named Tedesco who's a former Adams County commissioner who I think is on the more moderate side. And then there's one or two others who I haven't exactly followed up on too much, but I might start to cover them as well as the third. But I think right now there's a lot of horse trading going on in the back as to Caraveo trying to clear the field. But based on all the Front Range area Democrats I've talked to, they all think she would be an excellent representative, and they're all going to go pull the lever for her. So
Mhm. And Eric, do you have any thoughts before we move on, or are you good?
I do have some thoughts. I think this is a very highly competitive district. I think it's really hard to understate that this is a district very much divorced from the rest of Colorado's political trajectory.
correct.
Colorado has rocketed to the left since 2008, even by that standard. This district has stayed roughly the same, if not more Republican than in 2008, which is very, very different from almost anywhere else in Colorado, aside from like Pueblo and some of the some of the rural counties. So this is a highly, highly competitive district on paper, and Biden won this by less than 5, if I'm looking at the numbers right, which is well in line of not just a competitive seat, but a wave seat. These are the sorts of districts, even in a wave, even in a 3 to 4 point wave, this is the sort of seat you would think would be competitive, even in a even year. +5, -5 is generally a baseline standard of competitiveness. So overall, I think this is honestly about the best case scenario Republicans could have gotten, substantially better than a Douglas Jefferson seat, which would have had roughly the same voting pattern, but be much different in terms of where it's trending.
Yeah, the types of
so much
voters
worse
in
Republican.
Douglas are very different than the types of voters
Yeah.
in Weld.
So if Republicans have a good candidate here and it's a good Republican year, which is what it's looking for, this is one of those seats that I would look on election night as a bellwether seat. If this is flipping, Democrats are having a very bad night, or a bad night at minimum. And even if they're not having a bad night, this is the sort of seat that should have a close race. Weld County, like Armin said, Weld County did proportionally, in terms of the vote percentage, did get closer, but in terms of raw votes, the output for Trump was the same as it was. The margin that Trump got out of that county was the exact same pretty much as in 2016.
Yeah, and I know personally with our ratings looking at this race, it's going to be starting as a toss-up race. That's pretty much what we're going to be looking at for these open seats, especially this one, because, it's not a safe open seat like some of the other seats that we've seen.
Yeah, no, toss-up is defensible.
Yeah, I mean, currently the crystal ball has it as a toss-up. I think it's universally accepted just from the arguments we've seen that it's just going to be an open race. And the toss-up is, the best thing you should look at going forward. But like Eric mentioned, if a wave is big enough, even seats that are plus 10 either way on the partisan scale could flip. Hence wave babies. So plus 5 is definitely winnable. But with that, I think we'll move on to our next state with Colorado done.
And I'll lead on this one. It's Indiana will be fairly short because it's both an uncompetitive state and a fairly mediocre and boring map by any standards. So Indiana was the second state, I believe, to pass their congressional districts. And what they have done, I have actually numbers pulled up here. So this is what the districts look like according to lines. You can see they look relatively clean overall. But the big thing is there's not much of a change. There was thought that Republicans could get rid of the first congressional district, or at minimum make it competitive. They opted not to for some reason I can't really comprehend. They chose to keep it roughly the same as it is, which is a Democratic-leaning seat that should be competitive and could be Republican by the end of the decade. The big thing they did
I
was
can tell you exactly why they didn't choose to
go for
crack
it.
the first, but you can finish with your thing first.
Yeah, the big thing they could have done, from what I can tell, is they could have moved out some of I believe this is a city right here, and taken these two rural counties down there. That takes it down to about a Biden +3 seat, I believe. But they opted not to do that, which is on their point. They chose not to pass a radical gerrymander, which is pretty commendable on the part of their legislature, although it did make some decisions Democrats are not very happy about, which we'll go into in a minute after Armin explains the rationale.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys know Andrew Ellison, but he's a very smart guy when it comes to Indiana. And, what he was telling me is that basically the Mervan name has a certain cachet in Northwest Indiana that, Biden won the first by about 9 and Mervan won by about 16. So, there's still certainly a very strong appeal among Frank Mervan, and that Republicans, are, I think, more willing to just let fall on its own rather than trying to force it, especially when you take into account the kinds of areas that these are, Gary, Hobart, Munster. Apparently what I was told was that Jackie Walorski and Jim Baird had a fit when, the option was presented to them to add parts of Gary and, Lake County and Porter County and LaPorte County into those districts. The other thing is that for the second and the fourth, they're generally districts that are well outside of the Chicago media market. And, Republican incumbents, generally speaking, in Indiana, it's a pretty easy job from like a campaigning point of view, right? Like there's not a lot that goes on. But when you add a lot of those voters, you have to reintroduce yourself to all those people, and politicians just don't want to do that extra work. And so what they did honestly is a much more from a political standpoint for the Indiana GOP, that was a much smarter move on their part, because all of the discourse was talking about, are they going to destroy Mervan? Are they going to destroy Mervan? And the stealth move that they did was they shored up Sparts in the 5th, which is the only inoculation against any actual Democratic trend in the state that they really need to worry about.
I have two things to say on this map that fill into what you're saying. I mean, since you mentioned Sparts, I was going to mention that, but as you can see now in the new 5th district, it's much more Republican, to the tune of double digits more Republican. But looking at Mervan's district, which is about the same, I mean, these are areas that are eventually going to flip on their own. Favorable trends for Republicans have been occurring for the last few years. in Gary, in Porter, in LaPorte counties, and it's something that it's going to keep on working. But the thing that I really like about this map is it gets rid of that frankly dumb drawing of Southern Indiana. I'm much more of a
Mhm.
traditionalist on splitting Southern Indiana into
Agreed.
two districts. In this case, you have the traditional 8th district and you have the 9th district. I really like that they moved Greg Pence's district north, and they split essentially that territory along the Ohio River bordering Kentucky between two districts, not three. I really do
Yeah,
not like.
someone actually is asking a question about this. For Indiana, why did they shift Pence and Hollingsworth so much? So the reason that these districts were drawn the way they were in 2010 was because before the 2010 elections, in the 2010 elections, Southern Indiana was entirely a Democratic delegation. They had Brad Ellsworth and Barron Hill. Ellsworth ran for Senate. He lost. Barron Hill just lost re-election to Todd Young at the time. Um, and they wanted to make sure that those seats were going to stay Republican because, back then, Southern Indiana still had some old, quasi-Southern Democratic heritage. And at the time, the Indianapolis exurbs and suburbs were the reddest part of the state, really. And so that's why you can see the 9th and the 6th districts, really just going all the way up there. Because 2012 was a very close election in the 9th district. I think Shelley Yoder was her name. She probably would have won if Morgan County, which is that northernmost bit of the old Ninth, wasn't included in the district. Now, obviously, now they don't have those same concerns because the rurals are just so Republican now. So you can get away with doing two Southern Indiana districts with it, which will, absolutely not backfire on you at all.
Yeah,
So
no, it won't.
Mhm.
Those
And one
days
thing
of
I would
voting
mention,
with Democrats are long gone.
yeah, the big thing, the only thing Democrats have really been able to complain about was the redraw of the Victoria Sparks' 5th congressional district. But I honestly think the draw they did there is extremely defensible because the original draw of the 5th and the 7th districts was actually a Republican attempt at a gerrymander, believe it or not. The 7th congressional district, or actually, I believe it's, let me make sure I'm referring to the right one here, but the Indianapolis congressional district was drawn to be competitive to where a Republican could win it in an election. Back then, Marion County voted close to Republican in many elections. And so, what they decided to do with that, in fact, they almost nearly flipped it in 2006 of all years. They almost flipped the Indianapolis congressional district. In 2008, Republicans won it in the gubernatorial race. They nearly won the county in several races in 2010, including against Pete Buttigieg when he was running for office.
oh yeah,
So
that was a fun map.
yeah, so what they opted, it's the only time, as Armin has mentioned, that black voters have voted for Pete Buttigieg. Um, but the reason they made this change is that what they did is they basically put the most Republican portions of Marion County, which to this day are southern Marion County, into the 7th congressional district. This made it more Republican. The idea was that there was a snapback after 2008, back to 2004 levels, or even 2006 levels. Republicans could compete in the 7th district and win it. And then obviously those northern portions, Hamilton County was so red at that point that there's no concern Hamilton County could ever flip at any point in the future. And so they just put those Democratic portions or less Republican portions into the 5th. In the long term, those southern portions have stayed Republican, but the rest of Indianapolis has trended blue. And the seat was never competitive. They've never been able to put up a credible challenge to Andre Carson. So what they did this time is they moved those voters out of southern Marion County into this new congressional district right here, which you notice it shifts from southern Indiana to central Indiana. It has Richmond, Connorsville, and then the southern suburbs of Indianapolis. The new district has Hamilton County, these northern suburbs, as well as places like Muncie, Kokomo, Marion, and then the western suburbs are all in this district right here. So what they basically chose to do is you could have drawn a more compact district, taking in the surrounding counties, and it would have been more competitive. But I think them honestly moving those Democratic voters in northern Marion County into the 7th district is pretty reasonable in terms of concerns, because there's really no reason southern Marion County should be in the same district, or at least shouldn't be when you're moving the northern portions. It's purely a political consideration. That's why they chose to change that. Obviously, Democrats would disagree from a partisan perspective. You could have drawn another Democratic seat, but Indiana is also such a Republican state that it really doesn't matter. In a lot of races, Eric Holcomb would have won that district considerably, by a considerable margin in all likelihood. So it's not as big a deal as some Democrats have been making it out to be. But it is a complaint that I thought I would mention, and an otherwise fairly
Yeah.
clean map by most standards. I think it's generally agreed upon that this is not an extreme partisan gerrymander at minimum. This is a fairly least change map that gets rid of some of the excesses of the
Yep.
previous map.
And I will quickly discuss Maine and Nebraska before we get on to Oregon. Interestingly enough, both states have popular incumbent representatives who are able to go against the grain and hold districts, at least last year, that are voting in opposite directions at the presidential level. So the first is Jared Golden in Maine's 2nd District, which, as you know, voted for Donald Trump twice. Golden was elected over Bruce Poliquin in 2018 in the blue wave. Moderate Democrat, voted against one of the counts of the first Trump impeachment with Colin Peterson. Someone who definitely fits the district well and fits its Democratic heritage pretty well. In fact, the current district is about, or I should say the new district is about a point less Republican. So it's now only about Republican plus 10 in total. But that said, we don't know the dynamics for 2022. Jared Golden's going to be a strong candidate. He will not be easy to defeat. But since the environment looks like it's going to be good for Republicans, we currently are ranking this seat as a toss-up. Because at the end of the day, in his race against Dale Crafts last year, even though Golden still won impressively given the way the seat was voting at the federal level, it was actually, I would say, closer than people expected. I mean, we at one point had it as a safe Democratic race, and Dale Crafts was not a good candidate.
He only won by 6, which is not a great race.
More capable, that district could be competitive. But again, pretty much a map of least change, as you can see. The Portland-based 1st District still safe for Shelley Pingree, roughly the same partisanship. And
there was never any scenario where Maine was going to be a gerrymander.
The second, we get to Nebraska. And again, Nebraska, there's a little bit of interesting stuff going on here. First off, looking at the old map, Joe Biden did very well in the 2nd District, won it by about 7 points. Very, very good victory there for a single electoral vote. Was the first Democrat to win it since Obama in 2008 in its old form. But right now, the current district is just essentially Omaha and then Sarpy County below it. And the Omaha portion votes fairly Democratic. But Don Bacon, who famously runs ads saying everybody loves bacon, ran against Kara Eastman for the 2nd time. Democrats thought that they could flip the seat, and rightfully so. I mean, Eastman, after beating Brad Ashford, the establishment pick in the primary, former congressman, and then Ann Ashford this time, she actually came close, about 51-49 in 2018. But this time, even with Biden doing well at the top of the ticket, Bacon was able to win re-election by about 5 points, a full 13-point overperformance overall, if you look at the numbers there. So we expect Bacon to be fine in his new 2nd District. You can see the current district there that's been drawn as Republican plus 3, a little bit better for the Republicans than the old district. That combined with, Bacon's propensity, as we've already seen, to run ahead of the top of the ticket should all but ensure his safety going forward.
As worth noting, this is an extremely competitive seat. The old version was within 2 points in most races, except for 2014, which was a landslide 3-point victory for a Democrat, and then 2020, which was a landslide 4-point victory. So this old design was very, very competitive in congressional races. This new one makes little to no sense at all, though, I think, from any perspective, in terms of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and then you have the 1st District, which is Jeff Fortenberry's seat, and you have the 3rd District, the Adrian Smith seat, which, again, there's not that much change, obviously, in the 3rd District, although there is a little bit of change in design, as you can see in the 1st District, although it's still Lincoln County based around Lincoln. So not that much change. Fortenberry actually was acting as if he had a competitive race, even though he won by 20 points. People like to call Fortenberry Fartenberry. Someone vandalized one of his campaign posters and put googly eyes on him. But
Jeff Fartenberry.
he was well on top of the race, and he won easily. But he was running an ad campaign as if he were in a competitive seat.
And just for posterity, I'm going to show the Jeff Fartenberry image because it is just genuinely one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The thing that I don't get with this map is they made Jeff Fartenberry's seat more competitive. They did not make the second district Republican. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish here. Democrats are mad about this for some reason. They were very, very mad about this map, and I cannot for the life of me understand why. Because the new second still voted for Biden, and Jeff Fortenberry's seat is competitive or more competitive now. So I really don't
I
get
mean,
what the
it's not
complaint
like they
was.
put Bacon in a vote sink. They just made the seat a bit more Republican. All I'm
Yeah,
saying is that if Bacon could do that well in the old seat and he's in a more Republican seat, he's not at risk for reelection,
but
especially in a good environment.
it's an ugly seat. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess I get what they're doing, but like, I mean, maybe Adrian Smith didn't want any of Omaha in his district if they were going to do that.
Yeah, these
They were
incumbents
not going to put
often stop aggressive gerrymanders because they don't want to take in new
Yeah,
territory.
it annoys me from a lines perspective because if you're going to draw weird lines, you should at least make them work for your party. And they didn't do that, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like Oregon has the weird lines, but their map is
Speaking of
also
that, why don't we move on to Oregon?
yeah. This is probably the most interesting one of the bunch, and Republicans are now trying to sue to overturn this map they allowed to happen. So good luck on that. But yeah, we'll go over the Oregon. So who wants to go over the fiasco of a process that was Oregon? I can explain it if need
Why
be.
don't we let you explain it?
So start of the year, Oregon Democrats and Oregon Republicans came to an agreement in the House. Oregon's constitution is really weird in that it requires all bills to be read aloud unless unanimous consent is given otherwise to not read them aloud. Republicans have used this to basically just stall legislation, and it's annoyed everyone, mainly Democrats, because they have to sit there and listen to the bill being read by a computer for the length of the bill. This is for every vote, by the way. So any amendment, the bill's amended, they got to read the bill again. It's extremely annoying, and it did its job. And so at the start of the year, the Democratic Speaker of the House in Oregon, Oregon came out with an agreement with the Republicans, is that if they stopped doing that, she would give them equal say in redistricting. This infuriated the Senate Democrats who wanted an aggressive gerrymander, but Republicans did it, and to their part, they did not do the shenanigans with the reading the bills aloud thing for the entire period. Then redistricting comes along, and the Speaker of the House amazingly pulls a Lucy with the football and says, "You know what? You get equal. You're going to be on the committee, but your opinion doesn't matter." And basically drew an aggressive 5-1 gerrymander for Democrats. On the other hand, they gave a legislative map which is not a Republican gerrymander or a Democratic gerrymander. It's a little bit. It's favorable to the Republican incumbents. It basically assures them their jobs for the foreseeable future. So the deal with the devil that she was pushing was basically if you don't obstruct the process, you'll get the legislative map, we'll get the congressional map. If you do obstruct, the Secretary of State will draw an aggressive legislative gerrymander, and then you'll have to trust that the courts draw a fair map. And if that's worth it, then you can go for that deal. Republicans thought about walking out to stall the process and basically just end the session.
And they've done that before. It is Oregon.
Yeah, they've done it before in Oregon. It's like Texas. It's a state where you need a larger quorum to have a session. For a while, it looked like they were going to do it, and then Democrats came back with an offer to make Kurt Schrader's seat slightly more competitive than it was before, and Republicans were kind of just like, fine, whatever, and they stood back and let the map be passed. They're now suing in court to try and stop this map, claiming it's an illegal partisan gerrymander, but that's going to be pretty hard for them to prove given, they just allowed the map to happen. There's also no guarantees that the Democrats will not get rid of the quorum anyway via a ballot initiative. So whether or not this actually yields them any tangible benefits is a little bit meaningless here. But this is basically what the districts look like right now. The second
The whole
like
Oregon scenario, effectively, when I look at it, it's just like the Republicans went in their own headquarters, poured gasoline on it, and just lit it on fire.
Yeah. So the Republican seat stays Republican. It takes in all of Medford this time, takes in part of Bend County. The 4th is now substantially shored up to where it's not really competitive anymore. Democrats wanted to keep Peter DeFazio after he had the scare the last election. The 1st and this district right here in Salem remain there. And then the new 6th congressional district is based in somewhere. It has Bend. It has part of Portland for some reason.
Is that Clackamas County?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Portland is split 3 ways here. which is probably going to be one of the probably the largest city in the country to be split across, to not have a single congressional district, or to put it this way, in terms of cities that are split, Portland's going to be one of the more egregious city splits of this entire redistricting cycle. The end result of it here is that the most competitive seat is the new 6th district, which is Kurt Schrader, where he lives, and it's like Biden plus 9, so it's not really competitive. Uh, Basically, Republicans are screwed. I don't know what they were thinking here. Clearly, they were thinking of the legislative side to some degree, but in terms of allowing a map, the Democratic concession was to take this from like Biden plus 11 to Biden plus 9.
Mhm.
So they made that. I mean, that's what the map is. Republicans are arguing that this is an illegal gerrymander under the Oregon Constitution, which could probably work, but there's a Republican court. The problem for Republicans in Oregon is, of course, the Supreme Court of Oregon is not controlled by Republicans. So good luck with that. Anyone else have any thoughts on Oregon's unusual compromise map?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because looking at the way the 6th district was drawn and how they effectively just shored up Schrader and especially DeFazio, it was going against the redistricting theory that's been essentially pioneered at the University of Maryland by Tadeusz Brozek. So I thought it was something worth looking at there because redistricting theory is just becoming so important when you look at analyzing gerrymanders.
Redistricting theory. I love how this is actually.
But no, it's a weird map because a partisan blind Oregon map is probably something like 3-1-2. 3 Democratic seats, 1 Republican seat, 2 competitive seats.
Oh yeah.
Whether or not now, by the Arizona standard of the 2010s of competitive seats, there should be no issue at all with Republicans having half the seats in Oregon with less than the majority of the vote because competitive seats are good. The problem is that standard only applies to Arizona. It doesn't apply to any other state in the country. So obviously Oregon cannot have a scenario where Republicans can have 3 seats.
Again,
so you'd think,
it works against gerrymandering theory.
Yeah, so you'd think 2 seats. Republicans could have offered 2 seats. Instead, they offered a map where they could win 3 seats. And Democrats basically were like, no, that will not happen. This whole process made no sense. Nobody was acting rationally, and now we're stuck with a map that doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a communities of interest perspective, or honestly a partisan perspective, because the 6th is really weird and is probably pretty competitive in gubernatorial races. So, yeah, I don't know. This is one of the weirder ones of the cycle. I think it's going to be one of the weirder maps we get, period.
Yeah. And with that, if we don't have any more comments, I think we're going to wrap up. So
we can answer if anyone has some questions, you can put them in the comments real quick. If not, we'll go ahead and turn off. But I guess since we have a little bit of time, we'll go off at 40 minutes to give them a couple minutes to give comments. But one thing I wanted to mention is the redistricting wars have not been actually as big of a war as people thought they would be.
Most people are just shoring up their existing incumbents or whatever.
Yeah, Indiana didn't pass an 8-1 map. Oregon passed a 5-1 map, but that was always probably going to happen with Oregon. Nebraska is kind of a least change map to some degree. Colorado is actually favorable to Republicans, and people thought the commission would probably be more favorable to Democrats.
Well, the Democrats tried to rig the Colorado Commission, and then Republicans just yelled at them in public comment hearings more. And so they responded more.
Yeah, so I mean, the process has been kind of weird. No, Graham, we don't have any big states in yet. We don't have the New Yorks or the Illinois isn't in yet. California's working on their map, and it seems like they're irritating everyone. Virginia is.
We're going to expect to irritate it.
Yeah, Virginia, Michigan are still working. Whether you want to argue the commission works or not, they are still technically working. But we'll cover those when those maps are completed so far. And obviously, North Carolina is working on their draft maps, which seem to be, to the surprise of no one, favorable to Republicans in a way that most Republican states are beyond most Republican states are doing.
Oh, yeah. No, I always used to say they're Republicans and then they're North Carolina Republicans. Very few Republican states match the competence of North Carolina's Republican Party at actually doing shit.
The brutality of, Dan Bishop's probably going to move, just straight up move from Mecklenburg. He lives close to uptown Charlotte. He's probably going to move to Union County just so they can put Tim Moore into a seat, who lives in Shelby County.
Charles Graham is not going to be happy.
Shelby. Yeah. Well, yeah. But yeah, regardless, that's the state of these 5 states. We'll be back on our next episode when more states have put in their maps, especially when big states come in. So yeah, thank you guys for
Yep.
watching.
Thank you.
Yep, and we'll be back when they're